Hello and welcome back to A Method to the Madness, the podcast where we discuss, analyze, and otherwise ponder our favorite films and television. I'm your host Patrick, and joining me as always is my co-host Michi.
Konnichiwa.
Konbanwa. Today we are covering the 1985 film Ran by the legendary Akira Kurosawa, starring Tatsuya Nakadai, Akira Terao, and Jinpachi Nezu. This film is based on the Shakespeare play King Lear.
And it is also our first Japanese film. I think that needs to be said.
First Japanese film.
Yeah, hence my introduction, in case people are fucking confused.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We're both half Japanese. Yeah.
Yes, so we'll have some particular insights into this film, maybe. We'll see.
Yeah.
As always, we'll go into general impressions of the film. Michi, what did you think of this?
Fuck, it's an interesting film. It doesn't... So what I really love about this film is just, it's so beautiful. It is...
Yeah.
Like, there's plenty of beautiful films, and we've talked about it before, but this film, I kind of watched it in a couple sittings. I found the plot a little bit slow, and especially at the start, and also a little boring. It feels like a Shakespeare play where there's a lot of fucking background about some kings or some shit, and you really don't give a fuck. But when you get into the thick of it, it's actually quite good. Anyway, I split it up into hours and shit, and I had it paused at one point, and I had a break or something like that. And it was just this shot of the main character, Hidetora, and he's it's him and his jester, and it's his jester is kind of like at one's place doing something, and it's him like in the fields, and he's like acting all crazy and shit. And like I just ambiguously, like arbitrarily just paused at this point, and then when I left it on the TV, it just looked so nice. Like, I obviously I'm watching a good quality version of it on a nice TV, but still, like, the colors in it just pop out so well. There is so many different colors, and the clothing and the scenery is just beautiful. There's so much like color symbolism. It's like honestly one of the best movies I've ever seen in terms of a cinematography and how it looks. I also really like the subtext too. Like it felt like a Shakespeare play. And I went into it knowing that it was kind of based on a Shakespeare play. And I don't really know much about Shakespeare except Macbeth. And even then, I could feel kind of similarities to it. Even though it's not related to Macbeth, I could feel this idea of like this, by the end of it, it's all about the violence of man and these things that we do to each other and the passing on of power and what happens when, get rid of this power, what happens to the king, he becomes crazy. And then you got that classic, always in Shakespeare, a female character that's always doing some conniving stuff, which may not be agreeable these days, but it tends to be a common motif in Shakespeare plays, sorry. What do you think?
Yeah, so as you were saying, as per Shakespeare, he loves these royal bloodline political intrigue stories.
Yeah.
As it so happens, I also love that shit. I like Game of Thrones.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So do I.
This is, it's also an epic, which, I love me some large-scale stories where the scope is concerning a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think my main adoration of this film is the same as yours. It's just so beautiful.
It is.
I should have looked up the cinematographer, but he, whoever that was, just fucking chef's kiss, just mwah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Was this filmed in Japan? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because okay, it's great.
But that's the interesting thing about it is like the scenery you see in it doesn't really represent what a typical perspective of Japan today is. People think sprawling cities and skyscrapers, but actually Japan, if you've been there and been to like kind of the more remote places, is the nature there is actually really stunning and beautiful. It's not like here in Australia where there's like fucking nothing out bush. It's just like a bunch of shitty looking trees and termite mounds. But it's like that in Japan. It's like there's mountains and beautiful lakes, like an idyllic version of Switzerland kind of thing, that kind of thing. Like it's actually really nice country.
The tall grass really makes it as well, I think.
Yeah, and it's captured well in like a lot of Ghibli, and that's what I found interesting about this. It's kind of related to those kind of films too. I
was just about to compare it to Ghibli. It's, I imagine babbling brooks and swaying grass, and that's exactly the kind of things that spring into my mind. Yeah,
particularly Princess Mononoke.
Yeah,
because that's literally set in the same kind of period too.
Yeah. Yeah. I also, similar to you, my only gripe with this film that it's a bit too long. It's like 2 hours and 45 minutes or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like long films. It's a minor gripe, but anyway.
Yeah.
Overall,
It's
great
an
film.
epic.
Yeah. All right. So let's go into a plot summary. Can you read that out, please?
Oh,
Michi?
yeah. An elderly warlord, Hidetora Ichimonji, announces his retirement and decides to bequeath his kingdom to his 3 sons, Taro, Jiro, and Saburo. The eldest, Taro, is given the title of Great Lord, bestowing him with the most power. The youngest, Saburo, scolds his father for his naive assumption that his transition in power will go over smoothly, and his father banishes him for his insolence. When Taro's wife, Lady Kaede, persuades him to usurp full control of the Ichimonji clan, he decrees that his father must give up everything. Hidetora is furious with Taro and seeks support from his second oldest, Jiro, but it turns out Jiro is also scheming to seize control and sides with Taro. Refusing to relinquish power, Hidetora holes up in the empty castle he was to bestow to Saburo. Taro and Jiro combine forces and lay siege to Hidetora's castle. Amidst the chaos, one of Jiro's men accidentally shoots and kills Taro, though this was premeditated by Jiro to seize power. Jiro's forces kill off Hidetora's retinue and set fire to the castle. Hidetora escapes and wanders into the grassy plains. He is found by the royal fool Kyoami and his still loyal servant Tango, though it appears that Hidetora has succumbed to madness. With Jiro now in full control, he orders assassins to take out his father. Saburo learns of this and gathers up a force to fight Jiro. With some strategic planning, Jiro's forces are overrun and killed. All seems well as Saburo and his father are reunited, when one of the assassins shoots and kills Saburo. Hidetora, overcome with grief, dies with his son. Tsurumaru, a blind victim of Hidetora, drops a picture of the Buddha. It rests upon the wreckage of the castle. End movie.
Nice. So, the funny thing, my Japanese grandmother has 2 dogs named Taro and Jiro.
Really? I mean,
Yeah,
they're pretty classic, old-fashioned names.
They are. I asked my mom if she was a fan of this movie, and she's like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, I can't imagine my family really knowing much about this movie either.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Taro and Jiro though aren't really. They are typical, I think, dog names now. They don't really use them for people. I don't really know many people.
It's kind of like cutesy sounding, so I imagine so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, as per Western medieval stories, the kind of language they use is a bit different, right? It's a bit more archaic, a bit more ornate. Yeah. Similarly,
Shakespeare.
Yes, Shakespeare. You and I, Michi, we're both kind of semi-fluent in Japanese. I think you're a bit more than I am. But, and when I watch Japanese media these days, I try to look at the subtitles as little as possible.
Yeah, I do that.
I had a... That makes me think you don't. I had a really hard time understanding a lot of the words these guys were saying because I feel like similarly they were using archaic Japanese.
Well, it's not clear as well. They speak very quickly, but yeah, you're right. Like, it's a lot of the Japanese is still the same, but they speak in that very like uber formal way. And as the 2 of us aren't very used to that because we don't speak formal Japanese. If we speak any Japanese, it's casual Japanese. And if you know anything about Japanese language, it's super fucking different ways of speaking depending on who you're speaking to. Like one of the worst languages for that in the world. That's the problem with this, is that they all speak like that, and it is actually quite difficult to understand. I pretty much didn't even bother trying to understand much of the Japanese, to be honest. I just read the subtitles. It was a little bit disappointing.
But even though I didn't understand a lot of it was like really smooth. I felt like it sounded kind of like poetic. It sounded really good just on a level of music. Yeah,
and that's a weird thing about this film is that I don't know if you've watched much TV while you've been in Japan, but like live action shit these days made by Japanese people is usually pretty shit. Like it's
like all trash TV.
Yeah, it's all trash TV, but they're also stuck in this way of acting that's very kind of old fashioned. Like, how acting has changed over the last like 50, 60 years. It's like they're still back in the 70s or 60s with the way they act. It's like you as a foreigner, you watch like live action shit in Japan and you're like, fuck, this is a bit cringy. Like it's not very good quality. It doesn't feel like good quality, Well, obviously the anime and Ghibli and stuff is a completely different story because it's animated. And that's where the pride of, I think, Japanese filmmaking lies. Except this movie is certainly not that, which I found interesting.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is that there's no naturalistic aspect to acting, right? It's all like very overstated kind of stuff.
Yeah. But there's a couple characters. So there's 2 characters. The lady, what's her name? The bitch.
Kaede, I think.
Kaede, yeah, Kaede,
Yeah.
yeah, and the one that she ends up fucking, the bloke, you know.
Jiro, yeah.
Yeah, those two they're actually trained in a way of acting in the traditional Noh theater in Japan. And
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know if you've ever watched that. Like, I've never been to one live, but it's like where all the women dress up as like sort of like geishas and shit, and they act in this
Like
very kind of emotional way, like
Kabuki theater, are you talking about?
yeah, sort of like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, and apparently those two are the ones that are trained in that, and their scene together when they basically have sex was like had a lot of that feeling, you know, where everything felt a little bit more exaggerated. It doesn't feel naturalistic, like you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I dug that scene though.
Yeah, it was a good scene.
Yeah.
It felt very play-like. That's what I mean. Like, and I think that's what
Yes,
like kabuki
exactly.
theater is like, right? It's like theater, and that's what kind of linked me to Shakespeare. Is that this scene felt very kind of like I was watching a play.
Exactly, yes. It was like, I don't know, there's, as per like Macbeth, you know, there's lots of soliloquies with characters going through delusions and stuff.
Yeah.
Felt like similarly, yeah, you needed that kind of, that energy of delusion, but like it's
Yeah.
not a delusion, it's just kind of Lady Kaeda going a bit mad, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk a bit about the nature of this film, and by that I mean actual, well, a lot of different definitions of nature. So as we said, the landscapes in this film are absolutely beautiful. They're stunning. Yeah, and you know, in terms of just how it's shot, it's really beautifully lush. But the serene settings juxtaposes with the turmoil created by the warring humans.
Yeah.
So, and you know, considering that the Buddha is the salient symbol throughout the film, I think it's beckoning us to compare both conflicting ideas of nature. So human nature and worldly or earth nature, I suppose.
Yeah.
One of them tranquil and one of the other turbulent. So there's a pretty clear dynamic there. But also on the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of similarities, they both have universal laws about building themselves up and then collapsing. And to parallel our Breaking Bad series, it's what Walter White describes. It's Walter White's explanation of a chemical reaction, right? Growth, then decay, then transformation.
Right.
And obviously, you know, you can see how that occurs in nature, but just to give you an example of what I mean, attributing it to the humans, it's like Hidetora, he built this empire, right?
Yep.
And then it decayed when he tried to pass it on to his sons, and then it transformed into something else.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man, just considering how tranquil the world is around them, do you think the film is saying that human nature is at odds with Mother Nature, or just earthly nature?
Definitely. I think that's what the whole film stands for. Like at the end, that when what's his name dies, not Jiro, Saburo and Hidetora, you know, they both die. And that guy, I think it's Tango, and he says something. He says, and this is an English translation, obviously, men prefer sorrow over joy, suffering over peace, and then goes on. It's basically a soliloquy almost, which is, you know, so play-like. And he's just talking about how like fucked up the world is, and how fucked up human beings are, and that we as these people just always want to just seek battle and war and nothing else. And I think that's kind of a very key element of Shakespeare, and a key element of a lot of things, because that's unfortunately what we are. And I think this movie exactly is about that. It's about this conflict between man and kind of earth, and what we do that's completely different to what nature is.
Yeah. And the title of this film, Ran, means chaos and turmoil in Japanese,
Literally,
right?
Yeah. So what else does it stand for?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I love movies. I love stories that tackle those kind of big questions like that.
太郎の女どもになぜわしの女どもがひとまずくもっとろうか何を仰せられる太郎君にこの城の座を譲られた上はそれは当然のこと
So, among these epic political intrigue stories, there's this common trope of the dying noble autocrat, right? So, and just in case you don't know, an autocracy is when ultimate power is held by one individual, and so in this case, it's Hidetora.
Yeah.
And usually these tropes go. The way these tropes go is that an autocrat who holds a nation under his rule either dies or abdicates and subsequently leaves a power vacuum. And this will probably sound familiar to a lot of you because this is the main source of conflict in Game of Thrones, right? Robert Baratheon, the king of all of Westeros, dies, and so a mad power scramble to claim his authority results in a conflict that carries us through the entire series.
Yeah.
like literally that's like, you know, that story is a lot of things, but you can pinpoint the catalyst of what made that happen is Robert Baratheon's death.
Yeah, and just getting the throne, that's all anyone wants in that series.
And I fucking love these stories, man. I love that shit.
Yeah.
So there's this philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, who came up with this theory called the social contract. It's a pretty rudimentary bit of philosophy, but essentially people give up some of their freedoms to be able to live in a political order, so as to have security and rights.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that in all these stories demonstrates how fickle the nature of this social contract is. As soon as this beacon of stability is toppled, just abject chaos ensues, right?
Yeah.
It's like as soon as it happens, there's no waiting. Hence the title, Run, Chaos, Turmoil. So, do you reckon this film and these stories more generally are pro-authority?
Pro? Well, yeah, okay, I see what you mean, because the power vacuum is what allows allows a story to happen, which is about chaos.
As immoral as someone who's an autocrat might be, it provides safety and, you know, like it just does a lot of good things for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But as we see throughout the film, Hidetora's past comes to haunt him. Yeah. It's because he did do a lot of really sordid stuff to attain this power. But it's that what's it, the utilitarian consequentialist argument. It's pretty much Thanos. Yeah.
Yeah, basically Thanos. Yeah, like the idea that you have to sometimes do some bad shit to keep the majority happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can see that. It's kind of hard, though, because I don't agree that autocracy ever works. And I don't believe in it at all, because I don't think a person should ever have absolute power. But some people do kind of agree that it can work. And I see your point. But at the end of the day, if the society wasn't autocratic, then if the leader dies, this shit doesn't need to happen, because there's already measures in place that means that this won't happen. Mm-hmm. But as a film, the film is kind of, I guess, saying that to some degree. But I don't know, is it really though? Like, is Game of Thrones saying that? I think it's just saying more that, like, you know, people are fucking greedy and they'll just fight for power and do some nasty shit for it. And that's just what pretty much half of Shakespeare is about, what Game of Thrones is about, and what this movie Run is about. Like, it's just about that.
Yeah, I think Game of Thrones is way more focused on, like, the consequences of political systems. I think this film is just focused on, like, bigger ontological questions of nature and chaos. Yeah. But yeah, as my man Kanye says, no one man should have all that power.
Exactly. It's true, but doesn't work.
Yeah. All right. So, do you remember that scene when Hidetora and Tango, they find that shack with that blind dude?
Yeah. What's the guy that at the end of the film?
Tsurumaru,
yeah.
Yeah. And then he gives some story about how when in Hidetora's grab for power, he had this dude's eyes scooped out of his brain or his head.
Scooped out.
Yeah, well, I know he lost his eyes because Hidetora deemed it so.
His eyes. Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty fucked up. And then he plays his flute for him, and then Hidetora has this like fucking...
Yeah, he skitzes out.
Yeah.
Must be some mushies in that soup or something.
So yeah, man. I did some research on this. There's this essay by this dude Christopher I. Lenrich.
Yeah.
It's called "Hearing Transcendence: Distorted Iconism in Toru Takemitsu's film music." Toru Takemitsu is the composer for this movie.
Yeah.
And apparently he's done a lot of other Kurosawa films. So he examines how his work throughout his career has used this distorted iconism, which he describes as an oral resemblance is altered so as to suggest transcendence. He uses music theory and semiotics and goes like really in depth with, you know, how that's executed within the film. So basically it's meant to highlight the otherworldly religious aspect of higher powers meddling in the superficial affairs of us tiny humans, as the jester, you know, says in his soliloquy at the end. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, when he plays the flute for Hidetora, just, you know, more to this religious overtone is that he's being punished for the sins of his past.
I mean, that's fair enough. Yeah. It's interesting how quickly he breaks down, and there's not really any apparent reason why he does, aside from the fact that his sons turn on him. I mean, is that why he kind of goes crazy? Because, you know, he had everything and now he has nothing? And is it just demonstrating the difference between being an autocrat, like the king, and versus being like a shit peasant.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess everything that his identity is based around is, being an autocrat and having his attempt to bequeath his power to his 3 sons goes all wrong. So he finds out that he has no power, he has no like love from his family.
Yeah,
he just has nothing, and that's his entire identity, right? So
yeah, true. So it does drive him a bit mad. That's very Shakespearean as well.
It is, right? Yeah. Yeah,
Although
I'm noticing a pattern.
Although apparently it wasn't quite based on Shakespeare. It was an influence after he already had the story. It was based on the story of some like actual warlord back in old like feudal Japan. So it's interesting actually that if that's the case, then sure, like a lot of it's like a combination of both of this story and Shakespeare. But like the case is that even these stories that exist in Japan, a completely different country to England where Shakespeare was, and they really represent the same thing and mean the same thing, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we all do the same shit.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of sad.
So you brought this up earlier about how, in this movie, as per a lot of Shakespeare stuff, as per a lot of like medieval stories, there's this trope of like the women whispering in the ears of powerful men and being the puppet behind the scenes, master behind the scenes. Yeah. What's interesting is that in the play that this is based off, King Lear, the characters are the 3 daughters instead of the three sons of King Lear.
Yeah, that's a good point, which I thought was unusual as well.
Yeah. And it's in that play, it's the husbands of those 3 daughters that are doing the whispering and the conniving. Yeah.
Really? Okay. I just assumed, because I don't really know much about Shakespeare, but like having Romeo and Juliet, which is a pretty stereotypical like man, female, man, woman kind of story, and then you got like Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, who's like real conniving. And like I just assumed that he was just a typical man of the 16th century, just super misogynist, but no, he isn't then if he's writing that in King Lear.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird, eh?
So why did the director for this film, Kurosawa, actually decide to change that? That's an interesting bit.
Maybe it's more historically accurate.
Yeah, based on that story, the Japanese story. Yeah.
Well, yeah, as you said, like he only started writing it parallel to King Lear after he had got the bones of the story.
Yeah.
True. And so because King Lear deals with like the relationship between dads and daughters. Of course, fucking our boy Sigmund Freud was like, well, what do we have here? Electrocomplex much? And so there's like a reading of King Lear about incest, which is, again, Game of Thrones. It seems that trope is carried on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about like medieval, feudal stories and incest, man, but people love that shit, apparently.
It's always about the same shit. Incest, power, and lots of fucking murder.
Yeah,
it's
the reading I read about that was interesting though. The incest. I'm overplaying this incest thing. It wasn't a huge part of the subtext of that, and I don't think it was. It's not that. It's not really implied in the play as well. Not that I've read it. By the way, I haven't read King Lear or anything.
Yeah, neither have I. Fuck that.
But yeah, it was interesting. There was this reading about how King Lear wanted to supplement his mother with his daughters because apparently King Lear's mother, he never had a mother or something.
Yeah.
And so and at the beginning when he's going to bequeath his power to his daughters, he gets them to like fawn over him and tell him how much they love him.
Yeah.
And then it's the youngest, the 2 oldest daughters play it up, tell him how much they love him, and then the oldest daughter doesn't say anything because she's like, I don't think I should need to do this to express my love. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's like, yeah, as I said, Sigmund Freud was having a field day with this shit.
I'm happy as well that we finally come across something that's based on Shakespeare, but it's actually enjoyable and kind of good. Because remember how we were talking last podcast about American Psychopath such a while ago?
Right.
And we were like, oh, why do they have to teach this shit to children in school? But finally, reading Macbeth in high school has finally come to something. You know,
It's
like
gone full circle.
it's come to a little bit more understanding in this particular movie.
Do you like Macbeth?
I thought it was the story was very interesting. You know,
Yeah.
and what I like about Shakespeare and this, you know, I never really I know last podcast I was really cynical about it, but you know, this movie's kind of brought it back for me, and I do remember that it's so the motives and everything, the motives and the subtext or the themes in Shakespeare are so fundamental. Like they just represent exactly what the fuck is wrong with human beings. And nothing is that complicated for the motives of these people. It's simply just power or love or something like that. And I think that's a very powerful thing that's explored in that as well as in this film. And I think, you know, it's in that way, it maybe is a good thing to some degree to teach it. Just, I can't get past the language. That's the bit that's shit. So
Yeah.
that's why modern adaptations of Macbeth are usually pretty sick. So
Have you seen the one with our boy? What's his name?
Michael Fassbender, still got to watch it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. Yeah, as inaccessible as Macbeth is, as we were saying, I love it. I think it's like actually a superb story. It's great.
Yeah, it's
and
really good.
Yeah, and to what you were saying about how fundamental the ideas that in the Shakespeare plays are, the comic series I've been reading recently, The Sandman by Neil Gaiman, deals with mainly mythology.
Yep.
And he uses a lot of like Shakespeare influence and references Shakespeare a lot.
Yeah.
As to suggest, you know, like what Shakespeare explores is pretty much mythology.
Yeah.
Because it's just so broad in its themes and ideas. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it really is. It's actually interesting when you put it like that.
Yeah.
Actually seems good.
Yeah. Have you seen any other Kurosawa films?
I haven't actually. This is the first film
Really?
I've seen by him. Yeah.
I've seen The Seven Samurai and Ikiru.
Yeah.
Seven Samurai is like kind of another bit of another epic kind of, and Ikiru is like really personal. I feel like this is like a nice little synthesis of those two extremes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he seems like an interesting director. Like he's done some good
Yeah.
shit.
But I think this is my favorite film of his, and I think a lot of people agree with me, is that this is lauded as like his best work.
Is he still alive?
I don't know.
No, he's been dead since 98.
Oh, damn. When were
Yeah.
we born?
He was born in 1910. What the fuck? Jesus.
Damn.
He's like a classic, bit like Miyazaki, just keeps directing, doing shit until he's on his deathbed, you know.
Yeah,
Exactly.
true Japanese.
Yeah, that guy just
Yeah.
announced that he got bored of retirement. He's doing something else now. More shit. I just want to talk about kind of the Japanese culture. So what I find interesting in this film is that I don't think there's a single portrayal of seppuku, is there? Like, you don't actually see anyone doing it.
In this film. Well,
Yeah.
Hidetora tries it, but he can't find a sword, which is interesting.
Well, he has the sword and he just throws it away. It's like he doesn't
No,
want to do it.
It's broken, though.
Is it?
Yeah, remember, like, what happens? He's, like, defending himself, or he's, like, whacking someone with it, and it snaps?
Nah, that was someone else.
Are you sure?
Are you talking about the scene on the stairs where the soldiers are going up and then...
Yeah.
Yeah, no, wasn't there someone else and his sword broke?
Oh,
He was up
okay.
at the top of the castle still in like the throne room or whatever the fuck it is, and pretty sure he had a sword or something that he could have killed himself with, and then he just threw it away and then just walked out, which
But
I find
he-
interesting.
He was searching for something. I thought that was, like, he was searching for a sword.
Wait, let's.
Because, like, there's the sheath in the back, and he's, like, goes towards it, and there's, like, no sword in it.
Oh yeah, you're right. Anyway. Okay, so Hidetora was meant to kill himself, but he didn't because he couldn't find the sword. But he still could have killed himself by throwing himself off or something like that. The point is, right, that, you know, like the way foreigners kind of, and certainly I do too, look at like old Japanese culture, like, you know, prior World War II, basically. And this particular aspect of Japanese culture, this feudal era, represents exactly what we see in old Japanese culture, this idea of like the Bushido code and samurai and killing yourself before being captured by the enemy, and this honor and death kind of thing. And I thought there'd be a little bit more of that in this film. And surprisingly, there wasn't any at all. I mean, there's no single portrayal of anyone committing suicide. And in fact, the person who should have killed himself, Hidetora, ends up, like they say, like, you know, when they're outside sieging a castle, they're like, oh, you know, he's going to commit seppuku. But then what does he do? He just walks out, which is like the really a shaming thing to do, I suppose, in back then, you know, like it would have been the right thing to do was to kill yourself, and he should have done that. And I feel like, you know, that was a big part in his contribution to madness, I suppose. It's almost like in their religion, they believe that that's the right thing to do, and he didn't do the right thing, and therefore what does he get? He gets madness, which I thought was kind of my interpretation of what was going on, trying to connect it to more the Japanese side as opposed to anything else. And the whole film is about that. It kind of shows, like, at the end of the movie when is it Jiro who's the last son that's left alive? He's
Saburo.
like Saburo? No, Saburo's shot on the horse, wasn't he? He was the one holding
Oh yeah, no, sorry, you're right.
Yeah, Jiro. He says him and his men, like, they're like, oh, we'll die with you in battle. But then the film doesn't actually show them dying. It just cuts, and then there's a shot of the soldiers just storming the castle, and then that's pretty much the end of the movie. So the movie is kind of like focusing on not showing those things, even though they're so crucial to Japanese culture back then, and especially when it's about samurai. It's like the opposite of watching like Tom Cruise's The Last Samurai, where the end of the movie is like all these sequences of these samurai, like the last of them dying for their country against these foreigners and stuff like that, and you know, like the death of like the Bushido and stuff like that. And this movie isn't about that at all. In fact, it's about the opposite. It's kind of about the futility of just killing yourself meaninglessly, and how like this idea of honor and death kind of has no meaning, because at the end of the day, what's the point of having honor and death when human beings are the ones that cause all this conflict? And really, like, it's not a nice thing to have war to begin with. So killing yourself in war as an honor kind of thing really isn't a nice thing either.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. It's almost like, you know, like the Buddha is denying his right to commit seppuku or something.
Yeah.
As a punishment, yeah.
Yeah, but ultimately, like, it's kind of pointless doing that anyway from, like, a non-Buddha perspective, from the viewer's perspective, from maybe even Kurosawa's perspective. It's kind of like saying, like, you know, this idea of killing yourself for that reason is silly, because war is silly. It's all stupid. You know, killing yourself in war, it doesn't matter how you do it. Like, war in general is a bad thing. It doesn't matter how you view war and whether you should kill yourself or be captured. It's all absurd.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I thought that was an interesting point of the movie. I just, you know, I thought there'd be more of it, and there wasn't, and I like that.
Yeah, nice.
Cool. That's all I got.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. Do you have any recommendations for this week, Mitchie?
It's been so long since we did one. I completely forgot that was even a thing we need to do. Yes, I do. I already said it. But Princess Mononoke.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say The Last Samurai, Tom Cruise.
Nah, that movie's shit. I mean, you know, it's Tom Cruise. It's never gonna be that great, except Magnolia. But no, I said Princess Mononoke before, but I actually, like, when I started watching this, and literally the opening scene when they shoot that pig or whatever the fuck's going on there, that is the opening scene in Princess Mononoke, except the pig is possessed by some demon. But that's what happens at the start of that film. They shoot a pig, and I was just like instantly connecting them. I was like, shit, like everything about this feels so similar. Just obviously Princess Mononoke is supernatural.
Holy shit, yeah, I never connected that. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, pigs are a big kind of, I think they never really thought about it, but they're kind of like a symbol of Japan, I think, like in terms of like, you know, a kangaroo is a symbol of the animals of Australia. You know, the pig and the deer.
I thought a tanuki was a symbol of Japan.
No one knows what a tanuki is. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, but the thing is like I think of deers and pigs now, I suppose, when I think of animals in Japan. Except I've never seen a pig there. Anyway, have you got a recommendation?
If you like samurai swashbuckling, this is another animation. This series called Samurai Champloo by Shinichiro Watanabe. He made another really well acclaimed series called Cowboy Bebop.
Oh yeah.
That's great. Great action, great philosophy. So check that out if you're interested.
Cool.
Where can people find us?
People can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. The order mixes up every time. And we got a website, amttm.com. If you have any questions, send them through to mail@amttm.com. And if you like our content, check out zeroindent.com. And another thing, check out our Breaking Bad edition, because we've been getting into that, and it's getting there. We just finished season 1.
Nice. And what are we doing next time?
We are doing Schindler's List. Speaking of autocracies, that's one of the most notorious ones out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited for that.
Our first Spielberg film, I think?
Yeah, it is actually our first Spielberg film. Probably our first Neeson film too.
Oh, yeah.
First Ralph Fiennes film too. First Holocaust film too. Man, it's our first World War II film too. I don't think we've done even World War II yet. I'm gonna get stuck into the history. You know, I love this shit. Well, you know, from a historically interesting perspective.
Huge disclaimer on that.
Very good movie though, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm keen for that.
Join us next time for that. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
See ya.
See ya.